But if you just want to be successful, you don't need to go to business school to do that. If you truly want to get something done, you can hustle, you can figure out how to do it. And there's a lot of privilege that comes, and things get easier if you get in, a hell of a lot easier. But it's more about like, how do you want to like figure out what you want first? And it feels so much more congruent to everything when you're like happy and you know this is going to make you happy, that even the hardships make sense, right? Like, put it another way, figure out like, what are you willing to suffer for?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to How Did You Get In? This week, we are so excited to have our guest, Behram. He shares some amazing insights on what it really takes to be an entrepreneur and what he saw as the true value of his Harvard MBA.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to How Did You Get In, a podcast cracking the case on getting into the top business schools. Joining us on today's episode is Behram, a close friend of ours who is in Section I of class of 2021, along with Julia and myself, while we were all having the pleasure of going through a COVID infested 2 years of the MBA program. But thanks to Behram's humor, dirty jokes, and ever abundant memes and gifs, we got through it and had a lot of laughs in the process. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no worries. Happy to do this. But, I think I was typecast a little bit. I'm quite, I'm a man of God and I'm pretty pious. So I think that's part of the problem with business school. So like, we'll touch on that. Like, you just get typecast as the wrong person.
Before we start, I would like to introduce you to Behram the way that I met Behram, because I think it's worth sharing. When you first get to school, you're really nervous and you're meeting all these new people. I was particularly anxious, and Behram comes up to me and I say, "Hey, like, so nice to meet you." And the first words out of this man's mouth are, "Oh, you're the one who everyone's been talking about." And then he just walked away, didn't say hello, nothing. And so I went into a panic for the next 2 weeks until I realized that he is just like, you can't take a word he says seriously. So I don't know. Tell us, Behram, what motivated you to torture your section mates on day one?
Honestly, actually, okay, with you, I think we might have had a conversation or something before, and it seemed like you could take a joke. Like, in hindsight, it's probably a little bit too aggressive, but it was, yeah, I think, I don't know. That's how I think I try to make people feel comfortable.
By making them uncomfortable.
by saying that, like, you can joke around with me like that, with that too. Mm-hmm. And but the thing that's kind of important for me is, like, if somebody says, "Hey, that was hurtful," or "that was a bit too much," like, I think you should be quick to apologize. The people that just go, "Hey, that was a prank, bro," like, that's just the wrong attitude. You should be, like, very, very quick to apologize and make people feel comfortable. And then also you should be able to take a joke yourself. So that's the other part of it.
We are painting Behram as the class joker, but in reality, and we'll hear more about this from his background, Behram is brilliant, was also always incredibly eloquent and articulate in his comments in class, and added a lot of value outside of the humor, but the humor was really helpful. So maybe jumping into that, like, how did you become who you are? Tell us a little bit about yourself before business school. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to college?
Sure. Yeah, okay, this is kind of relevant to my essay too, so I guess I'll go way back. I was actually born in Pakistan, and I lived there until I was 8. And my parents moved to Canada because, unlike a lot of other people who have to do it because of political, economic means that are, like, it's really critical. Like, my parents would have had a much better life had they stayed there, but they realized their kids wouldn't have the same life or opportunities, so they kind of made the move when I was 8, in their, like, early and late 30s respectively. And I grew up in a city called Waterloo. It's about an hour from Toronto. Most immigrants stay in Toronto, and there's a lot of brown people and Asian people. Like, half the city's like white, half the city's like Asian and brown. But my parents wanted to move to Waterloo because my dad was an engineer. He liked the engineering school. It's like a really big tech feeder now. There's a couple other colleges, and you guys call it junior colleges, like we just call colleges, and another university there. But, like, yeah, a lot of good education opportunities, a smaller town, and they just wanted to take us to a place where if we just studied and work hard, we'd be able to, get into a good school and become like a doctor, lawyer, and like that's all I thought was available to you. So like, or like any kind, whatever it is, like you could just have like a good career and a good life, right? So that was their outlook, and like why I ended up in Waterloo and where I grew up.
That's awesome. How much this stupid question, but how much of like growing up in Pakistan until you were 8 do you remember? Like, is it sort of like vivid memory, or at that age are you not like recording memories particularly well?
No, I mean, unlike you, Julia, some of us weren't drinking when we were like 6, 7, 8. So um the the memories are still there. But no, I remember a fair bit. I remember having like a fight with a kid. I remember what like nights and neighborhood stuff felt like. Yeah, I have a lot of vivid memories of what it's like to grow up
Wow.
there. Probably don't remember the nuances, but like yeah, I do remember quite a bit. The interesting thing is I grew up in a not weird, unusual environment because my dad um studied in Bulgaria. Like the Soviets and Pakistanis had like some exchange program. And a lot of those, like mostly guys at the time, right, went there and then they came back and they worked at this steel plant that the Soviets and Pakistanis had set up. So a lot of my childhood friends growing up, my parents' friends were pretty liberal. So like we didn't grow up in
Mm,
like a big city. We grew up in like I guess it was like a factory town, but it was a bit like a
mhm.
golf resort. It was like nicer and it was pretty liberal. And a lot of my dad's friends ended up immigrating to Toronto and Waterloo anyways. So it was like similar community, just kind of juxtaposed eventually. And then yeah, it was like, so to answer your question, I do remember it, but it wasn't all that unusual,
Mhm.
at least internally, and like how it felt to my parents and community and all that.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So you have a doctor, lawyer, and engineer, and you went business school instead. Did
Yeah.
the Harvard name make up for it, or do you think your parents still would have wished you were a full-time engineer by trade?
Yeah, no, well, actually, all my parents wish now is like just settle down and marry somebody.
Oh my God, that's a tall order.
That's a tall order, right? Yeah, that's all they're concerned about. No, honestly, this the reason I talked about the background stuff is like that's really all they were hoping for is like
Mhm.
you have a good education and you have a good career. Like that's it, right? Like that was their dream. Um, HBS was like they still once in a while mom will bring up in conversation that like I can't believe like a son of mine went to Harvard type of thing, and
Mhm.
it was I think they feel it and enjoy it more than I did. Like we all get heads down and we get into it, and once in a while we talk about it like it's pretty unusual and it's awesome, but it's like the human thing to do. You get like for better or worse, you get
Mm,
used to your circumstances.
Mhm.
So I think we kind of lose sight of that
yep.
there was a moment where it may or may not have been a pretty unusual like reach or a dream to go. But no, for me, it was a bit of out of left field how I applied, and we can get into that in later, I'm sure. But yeah, it
Mhm.
wasn't really part of the plan. I applied 2+2 kind of on a whim. Like obviously didn't get in. I hadn't done anything at that point. I was pretty disengaged with engineering. Like I got through engineering, but I wasn't like I'm not an engineer in the way some people are that I've met.
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
can do it, I like it, but I care more about applying the tech to stuff. And then I've met
Mhm.
people who just love tinkering for days
Yep.
on,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So yeah, I'm not an engineer in that way.
Interesting. Now that makes sense. So yeah, just jumping back into your story. So you get to Waterloo, you go to high school, go through there. Um, where'd you end up going to undergrad? What'd you study and do right out of undergrad?
Yeah, I stayed where I was. So I went to Waterloo, like University of Waterloo is pretty good. And I was this is where I wish I had known more about what was available even in undergrad because
Mhm.
so my dad, when we first moved, he was an engineer, but he had to study again to get certified. And his first few jobs like were progressively better. His first job was literally like shoveling snow, like a few months, like a few weeks
Yikes.
after they got there. And then he was like a technician, and then he, started working as an engineer by the time I got into school. But when I was applying and thinking about it, I was just being practical. I knew Waterloo has like a co-op program. You can make a lot of money when you you graduate in 5 years, but you never get summers off. So you're always in
Mm,
school or internship, school or internship. So I was like, okay, that's the most practical decision. It's a good school. And if I hate engineering, I'll just go be like a high school teacher or something. And I can like coach football and basketball and like life would be chill. As we all know now, CVP is a huge contributor to all these PE funds. So teachers have a pretty good life in Ontario, or at least they did when I was growing up. But yeah, that was like the outlook. Like let's just go somewhere local, go to school. I wish I'd known that given like how much aid is given to students at some of these top schools. The year I'd applied, my
As
first
in undergrad, you're saying?
undergrad, yeah.
Yeah.
The first year I'd applied just on a whim. I looked at like after when HBS had all the tuition stuff and blah blah blah, they like bombard you with how much they give aid to people. And then when people brought it up to HBS, I went back and I looked, given how much our household income was, it would have been cheaper for me to go to like Harvard College or Stanford, at least the first year, right? Because the next year my dad started working engineering and all that, it was very different. But it would have been cheaper for me to go there than Waterloo.
Wow.
At least the tuition alone, right?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
but yeah, I just didn't even think that was like within reach. I don't know, it just seemed like something people in the movies do. I thought about MIT, that was probably more top of mind than the other schools, to be honest. And this goes to the guidance counselor piece too. My guidance counselor was like, look, if you want to go, you have to write the SATs and blah blah blah, and you can always go do that as a master's student. So I was like, okay, cool, maybe I'll just go here locally and then go at MIT as like a master's or something.
Nice. What'd you study?
I studied nanotech engineering. So it's like a bit of it's like a buzzy word, but it's just a mix of chemical engineering, like material science, biotech. It's like anything you do at the nanoscale. It's like pretty broad, like microfabrication technologies, things like that. But it really is, I mean, I think it's evolved. We were in the third year or third cohort. It's evolved since then. But yeah, it was pretty relatively useless for finding like a direct job, but great if you want to go to grad school. So a lot of my peers went to like masters, and some of them went to PhDs directly. Because our third and fourth years, a lot of the classes were like mixed with grad students. So like our setup was different. We had exams and all that, but they had to write, papers, and but we were studying stuff that you study at the grad school level. So it was just pretty broad, and I was like, okay, all the bio stuff is cool. Maybe I'll go work for I don't know, a prof who's doing like cybernetics or something like that. But
Jesus, I don't even know what that is. That's amazing.
like cyborg type stuff. There are like, you see stuff, people can move stuff with their mind.
Yeah.
And stuff. Yeah, like that stuff.
That's unbelievable. Very cool. Very cool.
So walk us through what you chose to do right after graduating and kind of what ended up leading you to the HBS application or general business school application.
Yeah, so after I graduated, I worked at P&G in operations. As I mentioned, I was pretty like unsure about did I really like engineering, and I was kind of going through the motions, but I wasn't really that engaged. And I figured, okay, at least I kind of like the business side of things, and I like working with people, and this will give me a chance to at least start to manage people. And in that way, it was great. So I was an operations manager. Well, I started as a process engineer, and then I got promoted. But almost right away, I started working on a startup with some friends on the side. We were like looking at a bunch of different ideas, but I'd noticed in manufacturing environments, you do something called a changeover, where you stop your line, change a bunch of pieces of equipment, and then off you go again, right? To make similar products, but they're a little bit different in size or whatever, and you want to produce the demand. And I noticed we were constantly in different ways, sometimes in high-tech ways, but sometimes in very hacky ways, messing with the surface to get the outcome or the pressure or everything that you want. So we thought, okay, what if we microfabricated these like the little pins or motors that you can make from scratch and make them really small, and you could like modify surfaces and whatever in a more flexible manner.
Wow.
And would that be valuable to producers? But anyways, we started working on something like that on the side. So right away I was like, okay, I start a job, but then I'm working on the side and I'm like counting down the days.
That's kind of crazy. I mean, seriously, kudos though, because I joke. I'm sure Alex had a similar experience, but like I was in downtown Chicago right after school, and I worked and I partied, and that was pretty much it. The idea of trying to then start my own company on top of that, and I know I'm alluding to it, but like that took you pretty far. Like it's pretty amazing to have balanced all of that right out of school. So tell us more. What happened with the startup? I know, not like spoiler, but I know you ended up in China for a while working on it. But like, tell us a little bit about what that looked like, and then how, like, at what point did business school enter the brain?
Yeah, I mean, the startup was very quickly, I mean, we started working, and then within 3 months, we applied to this accelerator. Well, it was like ups and downs, right? So there was a lot of stuff going on. It took us a while to figure out what we wanted to do. That was still at the time when everybody thought, WeWork was a great business, and there was nothing like the engine or VCs thinking about longer investment time frames. So it was a very different funding environment, and we were trying to do not just a hardware company, but like a manufacturing hardware company, which was like a PhD project. It was way too technical. So it took us a while to figure out how do we frame this correctly, and before we started winning like pitch competition, then we had a patent and had everything figured out. As far as time management goes, there was like a little bit of there was like stuff I did during the week, but it would be very small. The biggest gains were made in like a little sprint model where I'd go back on weekends and Saturday, and then I kind of basically all day Saturday, maybe sometime on Sunday, we would just like work and hang out and strategize. And that was the best part of the startup for me. And also like doing the ideation, when you're on a whiteboard, like you guys probably seen this in consulting, when you're not being pressured by some client to do it, problem solving is actually pretty fun. But anyways, yeah, we went to China within 3 months, learning how to live there, meeting all these founders from all over the world, and learning how to pitch and communicate. That was like a huge driver for me for growth, because I also learned how to, just do biz dev. I figured out what product management was. I literally never heard of it because I was Googling how to do things, and this kid kept coming up. But yeah, and just the thrill you get from seeing something come out of nothing, because like you're at a stage where it's just a bunch of stuff on documents and decks, and then people are just writing you huge checks, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm doing this, right? It's pretty incredible to see that. So that was when I was like, okay, I can do a lot more. I can have an idea and I can like start executing on it. I don't have to just like work a job or something like that. The way it ended was, well, you focus on the technical execution and all the business side, but then when the joke is like everything turns to lead, it really is important. And
quick side note here. When Behram says everything turns to lead, he's referencing a class that all first year Harvard Business School students take called Lead, which is all about leadership development and skills and how to manage a team.
my co-founders, there were 4 of us, including me. We were all friends. Well, one of them was my best friend. The other 2 guys I knew, and they were like my classmates in undergrad. We didn't really have the knowledge or the willingness to have difficult conversations. And that created, I'm happy to get into details, I don't want to belabor the point, but like it basically created expectations that were different, where one person wanted to be doing or leading one thing, and another person thought they were screwing it up, and then that caused conflict, and then somebody thought they were getting pushed out of a startup. But then what really happened was one day 2 of us were told that these other 2 guys are trying to, first they told us we want to stop working on the company as we were raising money. And we were like, why? Like, why do you want to leave? Things are going pretty well, it looks like. And then it dawned on us that they're actually telling us to leave, or there's an investor who will back them, take all the assets and put it into a new company. Right? So yeah, so you mess around with that for 2 days, and we call this investor up and ask them, hey, what's happening here? And they were like, we don't know what you're talking about. We've never heard of this.
Wow.
So it was a straight up lie. But that's when I started thinking about business school. I was like, all right, well, I don't know if we can work on this. Like, let me just write the GMAT. I didn't really think about HBS, but I was like, let me just write the GMAT. I thought about business school. I've gained a lot of.
Sorry, at this time, were you full-time on the startup?
Yeah. Full-time on a startup. Still working on it. We're about to raise like a Series A, and it turned into, okay, I need a backup plan. So just wrote the GMAT, and then while trying to figure out, hey, can we work together? Like there's like a lack of trust now. I just got a random notice that said, hey, like some of these files for bankruptcy for the company, like they're shutting it down without us. We were all directors, so we all could have done this. We were like, okay, I guess it's over. So we started doing that, and then I was like, okay, I need to look into deadlines and what schools I want to apply to. That's how business school kind of
a little bit of a stressful period.
Yeah, I didn't know all that.
It was stressful because of like there's the stuff you're going through, and initially I was kind of fine because there was still a problem to solve. Like this thing is happening, what do these guys want? But it's when that kind of lull happened and I was writing the GMAT, that's when it started to hit me how much I'd kind of invested my identity and everything into working on this. Like I moved across the world. I lived in China for over 2 years. And I was like, oh, what am I doing right now? Like financially, I'll be fine. And, I can always get a job. But it was just the realization that I had this thing that was consuming all of my thoughts. And all of a sudden, like I have a lot of free time. Like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That was actually the toughest part.
How does it make you feel about entrepreneurship moving forward? Like, are you just as excited to do it, or would you ever do it with friends again, or like any other like things that you do differently?
Well, I actually spent a lot of time in business school trying to convince people or pro people when they're talking about startups, like, why are you doing this? Because it's funny, even simple things like people often would say, oh, they rose so and so in money. I'm like, the money doesn't mean anything. Like now it means a little bit more, but capital is nothing. It's like, how would you feel about spending a year and a half and realizing the idea didn't go anywhere? You'll still get good experience, but you'll probably feel pretty disappointed, right? So actually probing people like, are you just reading about so-and-so raised money and you're excited about that, or do you actually want to do it? I think Founder's Journey gets into a lot of that. Like, why do you actually want to do this? What does it take? But besides that, I think I would do it with friends, but I'm a huge believer now in like very blunt, straightforward conversations. I'm not saying always good at it, but being as open, as candid as you can be, even when it's something uncomfortable, because it just saves a lot of headache. And I think it actually builds trust if you're willing to do that. And people, I don't know how many times I've been told by some of our classmates, hey, this is a touchy subject with so-and-so, like I wouldn't bring it up, versus like, and I have brought it up. And if they can sense that you're not being malicious, you're actually trying to do it from a place that you mean well, people almost always appreciate it, right? Like I haven't had it go back. But it's funny that the conventional wisdom is often like, I wouldn't get into that. It could be a touchy subject, right? So
no, 100%. I witnessed you do some of those kinds of conversations. I think we had some of those, and I always appreciated. It was always better to know when someone, if it was just better to have that conversation in the front rather than like make the assumptions about what other people were saying. And so, it's definitely a skill that it's interesting to hear how you learned it from practice, and where that came from. That's amazing. Are you still, sorry if this is overly personal, are you still friends with the folks that you did the startup with, or in touch with them?
Yeah. One of them is one of my best friends. He and I, we actually were jokingly talking about if we work on our startup and what would equity look like, because we both agree like somebody needs to be in charge. So somebody needs to have more equity. And then, but then we actually had a candid conversation that, well, maybe like financially both can have the same outcomes, but we both agreed after having gone through, like somebody needs to be in charge, because it even sets the expectations that, I mean, not always, but like in most cases, it makes your decision making easier. So for example, with the four of us, it was 25% each, right? So it's always like we're balancing.
Probably high overlapping skill set too. Like,
well, that was part of some issue where somebody felt like there could be problems, but that it was really that was the surface tension, but like I think it was really not having those conversations that caused that, right? Like you can always make things work if there's enough trust and you actually want to make that happen. But like even something like an equity split, if somebody's in charge, hey, well, I can voice my opinions and hopefully the relationship is good. Otherwise, either I get on board or I leave. And you do that sooner and you might actually preserve the relationship versus letting the pressure build because nobody really has a say over somebody else, right?
It's good advice. It's very good advice. Well, so you're going through this. I can totally understand, like business school is like not safety net, but it's an out. It's a clear path. It's a 2-year sort of set of next steps of what you're going to do. So tell us, you take the GMAT, like tell us how you got to decide on HBS and what you wrote the essay about. Like, what did that whole experience look like for you?
Yeah. So, I had no idea where I stood because my experience was pretty unusual. I didn't come from like consulting or tech or, finance or anything like that. I figured I would take a shot at GSP or HBS just because of like they're big on entrepreneurship. And I thought both would be a crapshoot. I decided on HBS because Harvard is just more well-known internationally. It's a bigger MBA program. And as I mentioned, I think entrepreneurship should be a little bit difficult. Like you shouldn't just fall into it because everybody else is doing it, right? And this is one of my hot take hills. Like I think GSP is like low-key kind of toxic in that way. I talked to some engineers.
Toxic as in everyone like pressured.
About startups. It's like being on Instagram and so raise money. I'm like, it's just, I don't want to be around people that are all like doing like self-fellatio about how awesome they are. And you know what I mean? And I'd heard some things from engineers there like that. the MBAs can be weirdly toxic, you know, like even
Yeah,
something as
interesting.
small as like they had mixers and she said some MBA was talking to him about a startup they had or idea they had, and they wouldn't tell him what the idea is. And then they finally told him and he was like, okay, that's not that crazy, but like, you know, you do you. Versus like where I'd been in Waterloo and then in China, people were pretty open with their ideas and like not
Yep.
everything, but they wanted feedback, like critique me, tell me, is this something real or not, right? Because it's all about execution. But just hearing, I mean, it's like N of one or two, but hearing stories like that and then just the international thing made me go, okay, I'm not gonna do GSP. So I applied.
And just so you know, for listeners, we will have someone from GSB on to defend the GSB name, but I tend to agree with you. I can also say that because I didn't get in, so I like have a little bit of like to them. But I've heard something very similar, that it's people, that there's less focus on academics as well, because people are so busy running to Silicon Valley, which is right next door, and raising money.
And I will say it was great to like have people, or like it was honestly refreshing to have someone be like, yeah, I was in PE before, I want to be in PE after, or, you know, like it's just like, it's nice to have, you know, like it is a more diverse experience if you have people you know, all not following the same path, for sure. I cut you off though. What were you going to say?
No, I just that like and a surprising number of GSP grads do go into finance, more proportional than HBS, right? So I'm like, it's a little bit of a false narrative anyways.
Yep.
I didn't even apply to GSP, but I was like, this is not even like whatever. Like I'm gonna pick one, and I think HBS is the better fit. So I think I'm walking the walk there, Julia. I'm like,
yeah. So you applied to one?
No, I didn't apply to just Harvard. I applied to other schools too, but like, I mean, weirdly enough, I'm pretty happy to be open about it because of my experience. I applied to like Wharton, I applied to Booth, I applied to MIT, I applied to INSEAD because international, and I applied to Kellogg. And I only got interviews at Kellogg and HBS. INSEAD was like a later round. I didn't even apply there. And yeah, like that was interesting to me because I think HBS and GSB have like the luxury of taking shots at people who have different backgrounds. So weirdly enough, I think I was more competitive at those schools than I was at like
interesting
Gordon Booth, whatever. I mean, those are all great schools, but they're like HBS and GSB tend to just have a bigger brand, so they have the luxury of messing around a little bit, I guess, with admissions.
I would not describe you as the pick for the messing around on the margins.
Yeah, I agree.
The other thing I've heard sometimes is, and I say this not to blow smoke up your ass because, you know, I really hate doing that. But sometimes when they also see people who are super talented, if they don't think that you're going to accept,
I was thinking the same thing.
If I'm reading your resume, you're not probably a Booth fit because you don't want to go into finance, and you know you're not. So or Wharton, and so if they don't think you're going to help the numbers, I've heard that is like very much a thing.
Oh,
I think Tyrell was kind of like that too. Like I was shocked, like he didn't get into a lot of schools, but I was like, well, I wonder if they were just like, oh, he's automatic like HBS, or you know.
I see the same thing from what you're talking about. So it's, so Behram is taught, he's not one of the like on the margin, oh, we'll throw him in for kicks and giggles, although he certainly provided those. So tell us a little bit like about the essay writing process. What'd you write about? You alluded to it had to do with your childhood, and now having heard your stories, I'm like, I want to hear this.
Yeah. So actually, before I get into that, like guys, given the focus of the podcast, like I did think like, who do I reach out to that actually can help me with this? I had met somebody like a while back who was into this like organization of people. It was like supposed to be like Muslim professionals. I was joking earlier about the man of God thing. I'm obviously not religious, so I never joined this thing. But she said it was a bunch of finance professionals and consultants like started in New York. I was like, okay, I joined this thing on a whim. Let me just ping some people and see if anybody applied to any of these schools, right? So a couple of guys reached out to me when I was thinking HBS and like gave me some advice. So I had that. And then one of them referred me to a consultant he'd used for his essays. So I did reach out to somebody there and had somebody guide me through the process. And yeah,
so that was a consultant just for essays. So it wasn't like the full, or do you mind me asking how much it was for just the essay help cost wise?
It was something like 7-8K or something to help you like think, like look at your essays and like help you craft your own story, and for a bunch of different schools. So I was like, okay, I want help with like HBS, INSEAD. I think I only did help with that because I figured I'll do it for the one that that I want to take a shot on. Oh, and then MIT. I did 3 because I want to go to MIT before, so I was like, okay, let's give that a real shot. But yeah, that's a person. So I used her for that, and I think it was interesting because like there was like pros and editing and cutting things down. Like that part was helpful, but it was more thinking about what is kind of unusual about your own story because you go for the laziest, like lowest hanging fruit first. I was like, oh yeah, I went to engineering, blah blah blah, and she's like, okay, those things, like everybody, like a million people do that, right? What I ended up writing about was that the immigration thing that I talked about. And it's funny because I do like writing, and I find it interesting that a lot of people copy pasted their essays to a bunch of different schools. I think some of those questions are really interesting and they're hard. I really do like the GSP one, like what matters most to you and why. Because I think if you can actually reflect on it and answer it well, it'll flow so nicely that you'll be like a surprisingly competitive candidate.
Yep.
But yeah, for me, it ended up being talking about my parents, right? As I mentioned, they moved or they emigrated because they had a better outlook or a vision for what they wanted their kids to have. They didn't have to do this. And I talked about what I remember moving there and watching them like kind of make sacrifices. Like their middle age, the middle of their life was kind of screwed up because like they had to kind of take a dip and then go back up. And that's what I put for my career. Like I started off working at this place where I was at P&G, and then I was working on a startup on the side. And when I started doing it, I saw, oh my God, like there's so much learning, there's so much growth here. I got to live all over the world. And I mean, I had the weirdest experience where I went to Vietnam and I came back, and Shenzhen felt like in my mind, I was like, oh, thank God I'm home. I'm like, this is not home, but I feel so comfortable in the city, right? Like I can walk around, and I think I'd still go back there and I'd be okay. I know people are safe. I know everything's fine. And like, I'd never had experiences like that. So that made me go, okay, I can do a lot more. I need to like really figure out what do I want to do. And I thought business school could kind of help with that. And entrepreneurship was still kicking around. Like, I think in all honesty, for like 2 years, I don't think I was like emotionally like there. I didn't think I would ready to do it again. And this last year here, working like tech and everything, I still thought, okay, let me treat this like an experiment and see if I can lose the urge to work on a startup. Because if I can, I think life will just be happier. But I still really like the idea of building something. So I think I still want to do that. But that's what the essay was about. That yeah, I think I have a vision for what I want to do in my life now. Like I still want to build a company. I still want to help people. I still want to bring people along on this, like build a team, build a company, and actually have an impact. But this is kind of like HBS would be like a way to start doing that. Gain some more knowledge, and I really did learn a lot. It was. I mean, we talked about academics earlier. Like case method really does help you. Like even in a seemingly throwaway comment that Lucas or P Fong makes, like you see what they've internalized from some really great investors from their backgrounds, right? So it really did help broaden my scope.
100%.
And
ahead,
did
Alex.
you, or yeah, I was curious, like I felt like the tidbits you're sharing about the co-founder situation you had at the startup and literally like learning to have those tough conversations, did that make it sway into your essay? I remember you sharing about that in one of the lead cases, but I was curious if so obviously it made it into the classroom. Did it also make it into your essay?
I think it made it, I don't think it made it directly into the essay. This is one of the things I guess the consultant helped with. She's like, hey, you can't like blow here too much, but it made it into my application in other ways because I had to explain like what happened here, right? And I mentioned that, and then it came up in my interview, of course. And by that point, I was like, well over it. I was happy to talk about it. But yeah, it was a theme that came up quite a bit afterwards. Wasn't in the essay. In the essay, it was like trying to articulate like why do I want to go to business school, right? And the idea was it's like a pivot point for continued learning, and like the startup sort of exposes you to like all of these different threads and signals that I would never have had at my old job. And okay, I was like, okay, how do I learn to like interpret these things better?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you ever have your parents read your essay since they're featured prominently in it? And if you did, what was their reaction?
No, they didn't actually.
You gotta send it to them.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I could. Yeah, they would appreciate it.
They're the reason you got in, right? Because of the essay and because of their role in it.
I think I might have sent it to them. I don't know. It's been a while. I haven't looked at it in a while, but yeah, that's an interesting exercise somebody else mentioned too, like sharing each other's essays.
Mhm.
Pretty interesting. Yeah, it's a pretty personal thing to do.
Yeah, I made the mistake. I started my essay. I talked a lot about my mom, and I sent it to my parents, and could tell my dad was like a little butthurt about it because like I didn't talk about him in it. And he featured prominently in other parts of my application and his impact, but like not in the essay. So it seems like you covered both of them. So like that's good.
Yeah.
I didn't mention my parents in either. Oops. Or
like you have to.
We'll unpack that in a different therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We need a full bottle of wine for that.
Yeah.
That conversation. What do you remember about like the interview process? Did you get any weird interview questions or how did you prep for that?
Yeah, the interview, the two guys that I mentioned that reached out to me, from that like kind of professional org thing, they gave me some advice initially, like when you're applying, like this is a person they use and whatever. And when I got interviews, um, I got like two pieces of advice. They said like GSP sort of wants to know who you are first, and then to figure out are you um like a dick, and do we want to like and then check your professional credentials and all that. HBS wants to check your professional credentials first, and then they want to kind of get to know you. And also screen, if you're a dick.
I was going to say, I've also heard the asshole test is part of HBS
yeah, it's so real because the number of people that we met that were, if they weren't nice people, at least they learned how to hide it or minimize it. Like it was a pretty cool group of people overall. And I was surprised about that.
Yep.
But yeah, the interview was a bit of a blur. I honestly thought I kind of tanked. I wasn't sure how it went because I walked in. I remember a couple of questions, but I do remember walking on thinking, oh, they'd asked me if I'd regretted doing my startup, and I think I'd sort of painted too negative a picture. And I met one girl from Toronto, because like she had also applied, and we had an interview the same day. And I was like, yeah, man, I think I messed it up. Like, I don't know if it went well. And she was like, no, I probably went fine, and it was good. So yeah, worked out.
I feel like
I
having
don't
that.
remember much. It was what I do remember was even when day before I arrived for like the kind of day you can walk around. I don't know if you guys know Moni, but he was there. He just finished his interview, and I was like, hey, how did it go? He's like, oh, pretty good. I'm writing down some of the questions they asked me for reflection. You can have them if you want. I'll email it to you. I was like, sure, yeah. Like, I guess we're technically competing each other, but you want to help me out? I was pretty surprised that, I don't know, it was pretty relaxed.
And you might have not even gotten the same questions anyway.
Oh, that's probably why. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I can imagine, like, I'm thinking about you walking out and thinking, oh God, I was probably too negative. But like two things. One, having heard your story, it was probably pretty genuine, right? Like it came from a place where you weren't sugarcoating, you're being super real. And if you're an interviewer, you're also thinking about like, what does this person add to the classroom? And in a group of people who are all saying, I want to be an entrepreneur. It's me. Yeah. Having someone who's been there, done it, and who's seen, like the dark side of how that can go, I think is like a really valuable perspective, and one that you probably don't get as often.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I didn't really think about that. And it's funny how much you're in your own head, right? That's the thing that I think once I got in, I was like in the middle of it, I was fine. I was just speaking without thinking, which
got you in trouble from time to time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh God, yeah. There's a recent example of that, which we won't get into. But yeah, like, and I think you're right. Hopefully it comes off in an authentic way, and that's what I like most. That's what I like about our section. I think a lot of people are pretty genuine and authentic, and yeah, when people aren't that, you can kind of tell, and it's like the worst. It's like, I'm wasting my time. Like, what are you doing?
Yep.
Sniff it out.
Yeah.
So you obviously were successful.
You passed the asshole test.
Yeah, exactly. Despite blacking out during the interview. But yeah, so you got in, you went. What do you think are like the biggest things you got out of the experience? And also share, what are you doing now post or like a year and a half after graduation?
Other than disappointing your parents swiping on the apps.
Yeah. Actually, my parents probably want me to get on the apps. But no, I'm a product manager at Meta, so things are going great with the stock package right now. It's a great job, honestly. It's super cushy. What did I learn? What did I take away? I think first was just the people you meet. It's kind of wild, the number of people that I feel really close and comfortable with, that I I'm bad about it. I don't reach out to often enough, but I mean, I think Julia, you and I have had many drunk conversations even towards the end of like class where, you know, the HBS experience where I was like, yes, I really do feel close to you, and we don't talk all the time, but like there's like real trust and connection there, right?
Yeah. And a year and a half later, you were at my wedding last week. And yeah, you do make really good friendships.
Yeah, so like that's honestly that was surprising. I wasn't sure that would I never really heard that about that. And even actually when I was looking at hearing about HBS, I thought they undersold the section experience. I realized it
Mhm.
can be hit or miss, but I thought 1,000 people, like that's a huge class. And when I read about the section, I'm like 90 people, like that's pretty interesting. You could actually get to know a lot of them.
Mhm.
So the people were first. And second was just, I guess, broadening your thinking, right? I didn't really take a lot of practical classes in EC year. I took like every biggie and weird class that I could, and
Big E stands for.
uh, business, government, international economics. Was that
Yep.
it?
Yep. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure we captured that
Yeah,
acronym
yeah,
for
yeah.
the
Honestly, I
listeners.
forgot. I wasn't totally
It's like, yeah,
confident on the E.
I just go, it's
Yeah.
government stuff, government and
Government.
the economy stuff.
But hey, you
Yeah.
also took Founder's Journey, right?
No, I didn't take financial. I'm like, I don't need to
Oh,
take
you
a class.
quoted it earlier.
He lived it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I lived it.
Yeah.
I don't need this again. But I did take EGC, which is like entrepreneurship and global capitalism. But like basically, you have a case study on every entrepreneur, and yeah, I took classes like that, and I love meeting people that think about how they think and their outlook, and am I doing what I'm doing? And a lot of times it's just, you know, pontificating with no real ownership. It's like you can do a lot more, and you don't have to. Like for example, if you just want to graduate and you want to make money, like that's fine. Just trying to minimize what harm you have, but like own it. You don't have to pretend like you're going to save the world for social credit, right? So some of that stuff can get annoying, but yeah, just a lot of people who just think differently, and the classes we got to take and the conversations. Honestly, it's like even here in New York, I'm realizing what a cool experience it was. It was such a distilled group of people that even every dinner, even if you're talking about stupid stuff, would turn into like really interesting conversations. And
Mhm.
you know, you talk to our boy P Fong, um, laboring out in SF. He's like dying to get to New York because like, you know, a lot of his friends are here, and
Mhm.
like and people like him, he's a great example of somebody who was gonna take all finance classes. And then
Mhm.
after talking to some of us, he switched it up and he said some of his favorite classes were classes like EGC that's just totally changed his outlook. And
He was still a Baker scholar, so he did just
go
Yeah.
take a scholar. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. He was gonna take easy classes just to get that right. And yeah, I don't know. You meet people from all walks of life and you talk about their lives and backgrounds. And I think one other thing that Avi, I don't know if you guys know her, but she
Mhm.
mentioned her husband Ben, he was a student at HBS, and how he had he was like she felt like they both had permission to kind of be like themselves in a more authentic
Mhm.
way than they were able to do at home. And I
Yep.
think everybody had that to some degree. Some people had a lot of peers that came there, so maybe they didn't have that freedom. But otherwise, it was a blank slate. Nobody knew you, right? You could just kind of
Yep.
be whoever you wanted to be. And I think maybe that created some of those conversations I was talking about. So
Yeah.
yeah, the meeting people, just the experience of hearing about different walks of life and what that was like. And yeah, I think just some of those life experiences, like going to Costa Rica and taking some of those trips, something got me in trouble. But it was just it was like I don't know, some of those trips were like my favorite moments in my life. And
Mhm.
so many people I talk to now, they say they can't do that, and I don't understand why. Like, why can't you get 10, 15, 20 friends,
Mhm.
plan a trip, get away? Like, it just has to be our priority, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, and some of those classes kind of feed into that, like crafting your life and ALD. Like, I took both of them because of startup stuff, and I just thought it was important to kind of reflect on yourself and the relationship stuff, because
Yeah.
you're surrounded by people who are pretty insightful and they'll give you interesting comments.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And two thoughts come up just like distilling what you shared here is um I can imagine some like from a listener, it's like, oh, okay, you're gonna go to business school to meet people. It's like, oh, is that really worth it? But it's like the most concentrated version of diversity of thinking and people
Mhm.
and like people who have done really interesting things that you will ever experience in your life. And like to Barham's point, who show up honestly, the vast majority vulnerable, ready to meet people without preconceptions of what it should look like and really trying to connect. And that's rare. And the other thing you made me think about, Barham, about like the trips and everything else is like the way I always framed going to business school in my mind is like, it was the biggest gift I've ever given myself. Right.
Mm.
It was like, it's a gift. It certainly isn't, you don't need it, but it was like the most enriching gift I have ever given myself for those 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of alcohol, just like huge alcohol levels for Julia.
God, I didn't drink that much.
Yeah.
I was around you because you drove me to drink.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably it. No, you're right. It's and I don't want to downplay the career focus, right? It's the thing I heard from talking to other students is that I don't know what you guys think, but I think a lot of our profs, a lot of the kind of official or unofficial messaging from the school was take the time to think about your career, take the time to get to know yourself, versus in other schools, it was very much focused on the recruiting cycle and the job. And we all did that. I think Ali mentioned that HBS people are like swans. They look like they're gliding, but they're like paddling furiously underneath. Like everybody was focused on jobs. I wish I'd stressed about it less. But we all did. We all did the job stuff. But I think the people stuff and learning about different facets of business, like it is practical, but it also helps you think about, do I want to do this? Does it even make sense? Right. And that's the first question. It's not like, how do I do this? But it's like, do I even want to do this? Should I be doing it? And I think the school kind of in different ways helps you stop and think about that. Because a lot of people want to come and do different things, right? And it is a bit hit or miss because some sections had a great experience, some didn't. Some people had a great experience, some didn't for a bunch of different reasons. So I do feel honestly feel pretty privileged that like, not only did I get in, I got a section that was pretty chill. I think except for initial, turbulence, we had a pretty great culture. And then everybody seemed great. iGuys are still hilarious and people are still posting stupid stuff. So it's still a blast.
That's amazing. Behram, just a side note, hearing you talk about it, in another life, you should have been like a philosopher. I feel like you have a very philosophical way of like thinking about and asking questions about things. So just an observation.
It's not too late for you to become an HBS professor. And exactly. the ones who like, no offense to the ones who did academic track, but I feel like the ones who first had their career and then became professors, like were, life philosophers at the same time and like had probably the best advice. So
yeah, that's interesting. I would love to do that at some point. If you have like towards the end, if you can teach at HBS, we had a program, there's something in Canada called Next. It's called Next, it used to be called Next 36, called Next Canada now, but it's basically helping entrepreneurs get like business education. And one of the guys who started it had made a lot of money. He was like a Canadian, worked on Wall Street, and then sold a couple of businesses. And he started one day deciding, I want to teach at University of Toronto, course on entrepreneurship. And he taught LTV actually.
Okay.
Reza,
yeah.
Oh my God. I was like, wait, I was actually going to guess if that was him.
It was Reza, yeah.
For the audience, LTV is
Launching Tech Ventures.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. So I was talking to him about, he did that, right? He had a whole career and then ended up
like also an insanely successful, like he and his brother started also an HBS grad, started their first company right out of school, right out of HBS, and sold it before the .com boom for just shy of $1 billion.
Some people are just blessed.
Yeah.
He's done well. But I think that would be a great thing to do at some point in my career, I guess.
Nice.
So first make a buttload of money and then give back. No. I've literally thought the same thing. I'm like, well, first I have to make this money so that I can then be an angel investor or like do all this philanthropic stuff and like teach at HBS.
Well, I sort of hate the competitive, like you need to do this to, I don't know, get some kind of outcome. Like we often talk about like take diversity, for example, right? How do we get all these different people into all these schools? And that's the wrong question. The question should be like, how do we get rid of the need to even have to go to these schools to have a good life, right?
Yep.
That should be the outcome, right?
Out of business craft in your life or like
well, this is where like it's politics and there's a societal question. There's a lot of different factors at play here, but I think giving back later is fine. I think it's one of those things people want to talk right away about mission. What are you doing? I'm like, it's fine to figure out who you are and do well in your career and like have a family and all that. And then when you get towards the end of your career, start thinking, okay, how do I make this everything that I benefit from better?
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I love
that-
that we go ahead, Alex.
Oh, no. I was just gonna say like that is, I feel like, really, or yeah, really good food for thought to like kind of wrap up the your input and everything. And I feel like if we can fit this in time, would love to hear one last parting piece of advice, although you gave us so many good nuggets throughout. And then maybe if you could choose a mascot for HBS, what would it be?
Oh, mascot for HBS, that's a good one. I mean, we got to go with Swan, I think, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Wait.
Yeah, I totally. Or wait, Ali, our professor, was the one who said that.
No, Ali Coco, our
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, advice for people applying and trying to get in.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, like, really look, this is subjective, right? Some people are very cynical and they say like you can write, you can like engineer the right essay. I really do think if you look at it like a chance to like reflect and answer those questions well, you'll learn something about yourself, even if you don't get it. And the second thing is I really do believe like it feels nice. It's definitely super comforting. It's easy to say after you've gotten in, but I really do think if you truly want to get, like, look, you're not getting into private equity because like there's just like a gatekeep there. But if you just want to be successful, you don't need to go to business school to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If you truly want to get something done, you can hustle, you can figure out how to do it. And there's a lot of privilege that comes, and things get easier if you get in, a hell of a lot easier. But it's more about like, how do you want to like figure out what you want first? And it feels so much more congruent to everything when you're like happy and you know this is going to make you happy, that even the hardships make sense, right? Like, put another way, figure out like what are you willing to suffer for, because nothing hard comes easy. So you got to like figure out, okay, what's kind of worth all that hard stuff. Business school, I mean, you can get into business school, but how many of my classmates said, well, now I have to figure out what I want to do? And I don't know, some of them are in PE and they're like not happy, and they're like, is this gonna be my life? Like, what the hell?
Yep. Yeah. Taking that time for introspection. No, that's like such good parting advice. And I think what I'm so appreciative of this conversation, I think it's kind of emblematic of the kinds of conversations we had in the classroom all the time, right? Why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? Do we really understand what we want? And if we do, like, what is it worth to us? And what are we willing to do to get that? And that's the kinds of conversations that we had every day. And that's, for me, I feel like that kind of beautifully sort of sums up some of what you described as the why behind going.
I have one last story. I think that sums up what the best part of business school can be like. When we were in LA, like a bunch of us, like 20 something of us, went into a house that was probably used for a porno at some point. 100% had like 70s decor. And we ended up at...
He's seen it in his...
I was going to say, I think you've seen it.
No.
Can verify.
Julia pointed it out. She's like, yeah.
I wasn't even there. God damn it.
Yeah. But no, we were at this place, like after we'd had drinks, we go to this restaurant and everybody's like hammered. And I think I was at a table with Anara, Lucas, Malika, Patrick, one or two other people. And we started talking. I don't know how the conversation got into that, but it turned into like, what is your biggest insecurity? Right? And people are going around the table and like, how does that affect what you ended up doing? Like, we're very, very drunk at this point. We had a whole afternoon of like having drinks and like kind of partying. And afterwards, everybody was sort of worn out and people started like, do we go home? Do we go out? And we just went to another bar and sort of continued the conversation. Like, we had a party, we were getting pretty drunk, but it was actually pretty open. And people were sharing some things that probably haven't told a lot of people. And it was just second nature by that point, because we had so many of those conversations that everybody was just, assume trust, assume that no one's gonna like share it around or anything like that. And that's what made business school awesome. Like, those conversations were pretty commonplace.
That's amazing. Well, Behram, that was a hugely insightful episode packed with so many good tidbits. And I think just a real look into the value of the MBA and the kinds of thought process you should have going into it. So we really appreciate you taking the time in your very busy schedule. You're about to hop on a call with someone somewhere far away around the world. And we know you're really busy. So we're just really appreciative both for this, but also just, for your friendship and for the humor that you brought to our experience. We wanted to have you on the podcast, not only because you're super smart and insightful, but because you add
you're a
tons
man of God.
You're a man of God.
Yeah.
And on that note, Amen. We will see you back here next week.
All right.